My name is Michael. For those of you guys who don't know me, I'm a ministry student. I'm still in school, studying to be a pastor, so it's good stuff. I've been able to help out here this summer, be able to be a part, be able to speak here a little bit, and working under this crazy dude. His name is Jim, and he's also my dad, so yep, it's interesting. I'm not anything like him, so. Well, if you weren't sure, that actually is me in the video. So this is a trip that I went on about a year and a half ago to Zion National Park in Utah, and there was actually three of us. The third guy's the one shooting the video, so that's why you don't see him. So this is an awesome trip that we planned, the name Zion actually means City of God. And it definitely lives up to the name, if you can't tell. Pretty remarkable place, and we spent a week there. But I thought today I would tell you a little bit about how this trip started, because you see all this awesome video footage that we took, and it was really a remarkable trip. But the start of the trip is not on film, and it's a little bit different. See, we put a lot of planning into this trip because we're poor college students. We're on a budget and pretty low budget, and I mean it requires a lot of prep. We went backpacking, and so we had to plan our meals, plan our food, plan our campsites, everything you can think of. We wanted to cross our T's, dot our I's. So we started planning this trip months in advance. We went in early March. So even like in January, we were already planning this trip. We planned the location, we planned the drive time, stop places. We got our gear, tents. We had to rent gear with our backpacks and hiking poles and everything under the sun. So we put a lot of planning into this, and our food. We actually we bought military food to take with us because you have to have non-perishables because all our food was with us. We didn't have like a Walmart down the street. We're pretty much in the wilderness. So we had to go to the store, the day before the trip and buy lots of food. And the big thing that we really had to keep an eye on was the weather. We were really hoping for good weather, and so we had to watch the weather for weeks and weeks and weeks. We were watching the weather here in Zion, and it was 60, 70, sunny, beautiful weather. So we were like, this is going to be great. The whole week it was supposed to be sunny, maybe a little bit of rain, but it was looking really great. So finally, weeks of preparation, the day comes, and we get in the car and we head out. And Zion National Park is actually 32 hours away from Indiana Wesleyan University. And we decided that in order to save time, we were going to do it in a straight shot. So you can imagine, other than stopping for food and such, we were in the car for 32 hours, and we rotated every 5 hours. We rotated drivers, and it was about as miserable as you can imagine. It was terrible. And in fact, the drive back was actually the worst. The drive there was it was bad, but we made it. Drive back was just awful because we were tired, worn out, and it was a long drive. So we drove 32 hours straight. We've been in the car just for over a day, and we finally roll into Zion National Park, and the park's pretty big, so we had to find the road to where our trail is. We get there, and we find this little road that leads to our trailhead, and we are so ready to hike. I mean, we have been cooped up in a car. Our first hike is pretty short, and so we're ready to get out, ready to hike. And we get there to the road, and there is a roadblock. It says, road closed. And we're like, oh, this is weird. That's not supposed to happen. So we're like, there's a visitor center right there. So we're like, okay, we'll go ask what's going on. So we walk inside, and there's a ranger, and we're like, okay, hey, so we're supposed to hike this canyon. We've got a 4-day hike here. We've already booked our campsites. Is there any reason why this road is closed? Our trail is, right up the road. And she was like, oh, well, you can't hike that trail. And we're like, oh, why not? She said, well, last night we got 2.5 feet of snow up there. 2.5 feet of snow. And we are here in shorts and a hoodie. And so we were like, foolish enough, we're like, so can we still hike it? She goes, and she was pretty blunt with us. She goes, well, unless you have snow pants, snow coats, you have the right tent, snowshoes, all the right kind of gear, and lots of experience, I would say your chances of making it are pretty slim. Basically what she said was, you're probably going to die. So we're like, well, okay. That was like 90% of our trip was this trail. So we're like, well, we are 32 hours from home. Is there any other trails we can hike? So she's like, yeah, because elevation is huge there. You go up the road, you go up a couple thousand feet, and there's 2 feet of snow. Drive 10 minutes down the road, you drop elevation, there's no snow at all. So she's like, you can go down to this southern desert area. There's no snow down there. You should be fine. We're like, okay, we'll do that. So we go down there. We book a couple new campsites. And there's actually a couple days of hiking that we can do there. So we're like, all right, we got this. We're still going to hike. It's going to be great. Different trail. We got this. So we find the trail and we get hiking. We're on the trail. We're hiking. It's awesome. We're so pumped. Our first hike is only 2 miles. It's getting later in the day. We're like, hey, this is nice. We'll hike, set up camp. So we get there. We find our campsite. We set up our tent. We eat dinner. Everything's great. We're so excited. Could not be happier to be hiking. And we go to sleep. And next morning we wake up and it's raining. We're like, okay, whatever, no big deal, just a little bit of rain. But Tyler, one of the guys on the trip, he rolls over. He's like, guys, my sleeping bag is wet. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why that is. Some of you still figuring it out. But he's like, guys, no, it's really wet. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then Grant, the other guy on the trip, he's like, mine's wet too. And so we all sit up and we realize that we are sitting in like 1.5 inches of water. I'm like, what? And so we scramble out of our tent, put our shoes on, and we get out. And this place where we're at is like the ground is like a sand kind of clay. And it rained so much that the weight of us in our tent sank down and the sand washed away, and we are sitting in a puddle of water. And everything that we brought with us, here's the thing, we're like backpacking. Everything we have with us is soaked. So all our gear is like, it's wet. So we're like, I don't know what we're gonna do. I mean, you can't, camp in a wet sleeping bag. You get hypothermia. I mean, it's cold in the desert at night. So we're like, what are we going to do? So and the rain at this time is starting to come down, like really come down. So we just start packing stuff up and just throwing it in bags. We grab our rain ponchos, we pack everything up, just throw it in our bags, throw them on, and we just start hiking back to our car. The rain's coming down. The ground is no longer sand and clay, it's mud, and we're like sliding all over the place, like no joke. And we got mud all over us. We finally get back to our car. We're like scraping off as much mud as we can off our shoes and everything. And we get in the car and we just start driving. We're like, I don't know what we're going to do. I mean, we budgeted like $200 for this trip. We can't afford a hotel room, all our campsites, one's covered in snow, the other one's rained out. We're out of campsites. We drive there's a little town there, and we find this laundromat, and we just pull in, we go inside, and we just start throwing stuff in dryers. We're just like throwing everything we have in the dryer. The clothes we're wearing are soaked. And here we are, we're 32 hours from home. You can't just call your mom and be like, hey, can I come home? I'm so far from home, out here by ourselves. All we have is our car. And we're just standing here in a laundromat, soaking wet, and everything we have is basically ruined. And it's like, I've never been in a situation like that. It's just like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm all by myself. Yeah. And how many of you today have been in a similar position like this in your faith? How many of you have found yourself in a spiritual laundromat? When you plan and you prepare, you pray, everything is going as it's supposed to. And then you find everything just falls apart. Have you ever been there? You put all this prayer and this time and this work and you're trusting God, and then you think you're going to wake up in the promised land, right? And you wake up in the laundromat. What do you do in this situation? I want to read a story today. We're in this series on Elisha, about this woman from Shunammite, and the situation that she's in, very similar to this. It's in 2 Kings chapter 4. You can turn with me if you would. It should be on the screen. We're going to start in verse 8. 2 Kings 4, starting in verse 8. All right. It says, one day Elisha was passing through Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to have a meal. So whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for a meal. And she said to her husband, look, I'm sure this man who regularly passes our way is a holy man of God. Let us make a small roof chamber with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, a lamp, etc., so that he can stay there whenever he comes to us. One day he came there, he went up to the chamber and lay down, and he said to his servant Gehazi, call the Shunammite woman. When he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, say to her, since you have taken all this trouble for us, what may be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army? And she answered, I live among my own people. Basically what she's saying here is she just, I don't need you to put in a word to a higher authority. I'm content where I am. I don't want to deal with that. I'm fine where I live. I don't need any favors from higher up. That's basically what she's saying. And he said, what then may be done for her? And Gehazi answered, well, she has no son, and her husband is old. And he said, call her. When he had called her, she stood at the door, and he said, at this season in due time you shall embrace a son. And she replied, no, my lord, O man of God, do not deceive your servant. Basically what she is saying is, don't give me false hope. You ever had false hope before? You ever have that friend who bails on everything? Do you know what I'm talking about? I feel like there's always the one person who always bails. And it's funny because I find that oftentimes it's also the person who makes the plans. Have you ever noticed that? They make the plans and then they bail on the plans. I have a friend at school who, he is just classic for this. Always making plans and then always bailing, and not just bailing, but at the last second. There's this donut shop nearby that's open really late, and he's like, "Oh, guys, let's go get donuts on Friday night. We'll stay up late, go get donuts." And this is like Monday. And so the thing is when you make plans far in advance, then you start to plan around them, right? So you cancel other plans. When other people ask you, "No, I'm doing this with this guy," blah blah blah. And then come, Friday night at like 10:45, we're like, all right, let's go. He's like, I got a paper. I'm kind of tired. I got to get up tomorrow. I don't know. I'm just not feeling it. You made the plan. It's like, how you can't, and it's not just like, oh, hey, I don't think tomorrow's going to work. It's like, hey, we're leaving. Oh, I think I'm going to stay. We're in the car, There's always somebody who does this. You know who it is. If you don't know, it's you. But here's a woman who Elisha says to her, he says, I'm going to give you a son. And she says, don't give me false hope. The thing is, hope is powerful, but can also be painful, right? And she knows this. She says, I don't want to deal with that. Read with me again in verse 17. We'll pick up again. It says, so she says, do not deceive your servant. Verse 17, the woman conceived and bore a son at that season in due time, as Elisha had declared to her. When the child was older, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. He complained to his father, oh, my head, my head. And the father said to his servant, carry him to his mother. He carried him and brought him to his mother. The child sat on her lap until noon. And he died. What do you do when the promises of God die in your arms? What do you do? The thing that's so interesting to me is, it doesn't specify, but I can imagine there's a lot of space between verse 17 and verse 18 she gives birth to a son. And then verse 18, one day when he goes out to the fields, this isn't just a boy, who's a toddler, or, he's clearly growing up. And I can imagine, she's pregnant and, she's hesitant, Don't have too much hope yet. And, time goes by and she gives birth, and, it's her little boy. And he gets a little older, and they get to teach him, how to walk and talk and things about life. Begins to mature, and he's asking all these questions, and it's just her pleasure to raise this son, this one thing she's never had. And he gets older, and begins to grow in size and understanding. And it's just their joy to take care of him, to provide for him, to teach him how to be a man of God. And he's starting to learn, farming or the family business. And maybe they hope someday he's going to take over for them, to provide for them. And you can see that this time is going by, and it's like the promise is so good. And then, out of nowhere, it just dies in her arms. What do you do? Sometimes it's amazing. It's amazing sometimes how quick a storm can hit, right? You fall asleep, and it's great, and you wake up soaked in water. You ever woken up in that? What do you do? And the thing is, I want to specify here, I'm not just talking about, day-to-day circumstances and, sometimes it goes my way, sometimes it doesn't. I want to say this, first of all, it seems clear to me that the promises of God are not usually your idea. Have you ever noticed that? I think sometimes we bank on a promise that was never a promise. We bank on something that's just something we want. But it seems that a lot of times God's promises in our life is not something you made up. It's not your idea. Abraham was called out of his own home to go somewhere else. Moses didn't even want to obey, and here he ends up leading the Israelites for years. He didn't even want to do it. He told God no. God said, you'll change your mind. Paul was persecuting Christians. He ends up preaching the gospel for them. Peter was timid and afraid, and he ended up leading the church. It seems like God's promises are a lot of times not your idea. Like a lot of times he's leading something that's outside of what you wanted necessarily. But what do you do though when God calls you somewhere and it doesn't work? When you give and it falls flat, We did this sacrificially and it failed. And what do you do in that situation? I want to read for you again the finish of this story, starting in verse 21. He dies in her arms, and it picks up in verse 21. It says, she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, closed the door on him, and left. And then she called to her husband and said, send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys so that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again. And he said, why go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath, probably something to do with, religious days. And she said, it will be all right. And then she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, urge the animal on, do not hold back from me unless I tell you. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, his servant, look, there's the Shunammite woman. Run at once to meet her and say to her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? And she answered, it is all right. And when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she caught hold of his feet. Gehazi approached to push her away, but the man of God said, "Let her alone, for she is in bitter distress. The Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." And she said, now I want to emphasize this because I think this passage right here is proof that we need strong women in the church. And she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not mislead me'?" I think sometimes we read the Bible without the attitude, but it's definitely here. I can see her like, "Did I ask you?" "I don't think I did." I'm sorry, I just can't help it. Every time I read it, I just have that voice in my head. And he said to Gehazi, "Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go." He is just sweating bullets right now. He says, "If you meet anyone, give no greeting, and if anyone greets you, do not answer, and lay my staff on the face of the child." And then the mother of the child said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave without you." And so he rose up and followed her. And Gehazi went ahead and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. He came back to meet him and told him, "The child has not awakened." And when Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and closed the door on the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he got up on the bed and lay upon the child, putting his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands. And while he lay bent over him, the flesh of the child became warm. He got down, walked once to and fro. He's probably praying. He's like, "I don't know what I'm going to do if this doesn't work." And then he got up again and bent over him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman." So he called her. She came in, and he said, "Take your son." She came and fell at his feet, bowing to the ground. She took her son and left. So what do you do in this situation? What's the answer? Or at least some answer. I had a cat when I was younger. His name was Rosie. And yes, it was a male cat named Rosie. I didn't mess that up. See, we thought it was a female cat. Then we found out it was a male cat. And there's, too late. We already named him. We tried to justify it with like, well, his name is Roosevelt. It didn't stick. We were little, so we were just like, but his name is Rosie. So yeah, interesting scenario. But despite his name, this cat was the baddest cat you have ever seen. He had no claws, but he climbed trees like all the time. He did like pull-ups. He just, he climbed trees. He caught birds. He caught muskrats. He caught squirrels. Everything you can think. He brought them on, laid them on our porch all the time. You like walk out and there's 5 birds. This cat was crazy. He climbed the neighbor's house. He got up on their roof. Sometimes he would chase the neighbor's dog. They had like a little beagle, and he would chase him. He's crazy. He's just no fear. This cat was he was the stuff. He was also just super chill. I mean, we did everything to this cat. I mean, we carried him around. We put him in high chairs, and we'd like pretend to feed him like fake food and all kinds of weird stuff. Just so chill. And we loved him when we were growing up. We were little kids. We started getting older. I mean, he got older too. And we probably didn't pay as much attention to him. But after a while, we started realizing like, hey, I don't think he's in as good of health as he used to be. We should probably get him checked out, but we didn't. Oh, the guilt is just now sinking in. But he seemed to be doing all right. I mean, we knew this cat as like the most tenacious thing ever. And after a while, though, it was kind of clear he wasn't doing super well, but it didn't seem like he was doing too poorly. He was still moving around. You still seemed to be doing all right. But one day, I came downstairs, and I could hear crying down in the basement. And I'm like 12, 13 maybe. I went downstairs, And my whole family's down there. And my little sister Hannah is crouched down on the floor. And there's Rosie next to her. And I remember this moment specifically because I've never seen something that looked so natural, that looked so normal, and just was not moving. I'd never seen something before that looked like it should be alive and was not. I know it's just a cat, but I just remember what it looked like. I've been to, funerals and showings and hospitals, but it had to have been hours. And, just sitting on the floor, I see him there all the time. And it hit me. I remember it specifically because I hadn't ever seen that instance before. And so close to life and just nothing. And so we stayed there for a few, but after a bit, my dad knew what he needed to do, and he picked him up, and we went outside. And he did what you always do in this situation, and we dug a hole and put him in the ground. And what astonishes me about this story is that there's no hole in the ground, there's no burial, there's no showing, there's no viewing, there's no tears, no hesitation. The boy dies in her arms, and what she does is she picks him up and she lays him on the bed of Elisha. It astonishes me because it's almost as if she is expecting for him to get back up. And maybe we are too quick sometimes to put God's promises in the tomb, to put them in the ground. Maybe we're too quick. Maybe sometimes our faith is marked more by a tombstone than it is by a resurrection. And maybe today you need to know that we can pick up the promises of God and bring them back to the bed of the resurrection and lay them before the feet of the promise maker. See, I think it's interesting that this son doesn't have a name. And he also happens to be the seventh son born of a barren woman in the Old Testament. And it just so happens that he sneezes 7 times before he wakes up. Maybe I'm being crazy, but the 7 is the number of perfection. Child has no name. Maybe, just maybe, this passage is like a lot of other passages, and there's something more to it that it's trying to say. Maybe it's not just about a son. Maybe it's about the son in whom is the resurrection. The son who didn't only die, but the son who also rose. Maybe this passage is trying to tell us something. See, 1 Corinthians 15:21, it says, "For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man. Just as death came through Adam, so resurrection comes through Jesus." And maybe today we need to remember that God is faithful, and we need to stop preparing for death and start preparing for resurrection. We need to have a faith that isn't preparing for the death. I'm not saying there aren't things that aren't going to happen. I'm just saying maybe you shouldn't be so set in your mind, so prepared for death. Because even in death, there is new life. And here's the thing. When you come to the resurrection, when you come to the bed of the resurrection, you don't get to just put one thing. You don't get to just say, just lean on it a little, and, oh, God, just fix this one thing for me. You don't get to just stand next to it and say, I'll just leave the rest at the door. God, heal my cancer, but don't heal my heart. Fix this relationship, maybe don't fix me so much. We don't get that choice. You don't get to just put a little bit on here and say, oh, well, just this one promise, God. It's Augustine who says, purify me, O God, but not yet. Isn't that how we approach it sometimes? Just a little bit. When you come here to the bed of the resurrection in expectation of the promise of the faithfulness of God, you have to put your whole weight here, everything. It's all on the table. Everything goes on it. Jesus didn't die for just part of you. He rose for all of you. And here's the thing. Let me tell you what one of the biggest enemies of our faith is. Brought with me a microwave. You see, because I think sometimes we get the idea that God is in the business of making macaroni. And that we can just, put our stuff in here and hit, 60 seconds, go. It's not how it works. God isn't just in it for the macaroni. The way I understand it, He's in it for the feast in eternity. He's in it for the long haul, the eternal promise. There are people who died throughout Scripture in faith, waiting for the promise that never saw it. They never saw it. Here's the thing, it's not just a microwave, folks. We can't just put the promise in here and wait. God's promise is eternal. He's been in it for the long haul since the beginning. Do you know how long the Israelites were in the wilderness? How long they were in Egypt? He's in it for the real deal. And big problems take really big solutions. And big solutions take a long time. I'm not saying that God can't work miracles tomorrow. I'm just saying, don't think that's it. And what amazes me about the faith of this woman is something she says. She lays the boy on the table, and she goes to her husband and says, I'm chasing after the man of God. And he says, why? And she says, it will be all right. That's her answer. She says, it'll be all right. It's going to be all right. When was the last time you had that kind of faith? You don't even need an answer. Your answer is, it will be all right. It may not be okay right now, but it's going to be all right. And I think a lot of times I'm seeing Christians right now who have their head in the dirt saying, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. And our faith is stuck in the ground, in the tomb, and there's a reason we're not seeing the resurrecting hope of Jesus. It will be all right. It may not be okay today or tomorrow, but it will be all right. I want to see Christians who have this kind of faith. Just say, it may not be okay tomorrow, it may not be okay the next day, but it will be all right. And I have faith enough to say it because I have a God who's big enough to do it. And his promise, he has been faithful throughout all of Scripture, and I can believe he's still going to be faithful. And even if I don't see it today, it will be all right. This is the resurrection kind of faith. Our faith is not in a dead Jesus. It's a resurrected Jesus. He is alive, and it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes the resurrecting process takes time. Maybe you don't get to pick and choose what God is resurrecting in your life. Maybe you don't understand the problems that you're going through, the relationship that's struggling. But maybe God's doing something in you. It will be all right. You see, maybe you won't wake up tomorrow in the promised land, but you can wake up on the bed of the resurrection. You can wake up right here, all in, with hope. I really believe hope comes from the Holy Spirit. And you know what that means? If you have the Holy Spirit, that is available to you. It will be all right. Maybe we can be a people who wake up each morning on the bed expecting resurrection. We don't have our future clouded in death, but we are expectant for resurrection kind of hope.